and to help keep our country safe from a range of threats, we are seeking a total of $21 billion to support the efforts of the FBI, ATF, DEA, U.S. Marshal Service, and U.S. Attorney's offices, as well as the Criminal Division and the National Security Division. We will use these resources to continue our fight against gun violence, to prosecute illegal gun traffickers and straw purchasers, and to invest in advanced technological tools like ballistics analysis, firearms tracing, gun intelligence centers, and local fusion cells. We will use these resources to strengthen our work to counter both foreign and domestic terrorism. As the FBI director has testified, we are facing an increasing threat of foreign terrorism since October 7th. We will also use these resources to continue to counter the threats that the governments of Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea pose to our national security and our economic stability. And we will use these resources to continue our efforts to dismantle the global fentanyl supply chain and to break apart the cartels that are responsible for flooding poison into our communities. As we deploy our own prosecutorial and investigative resources, we also recognize that the department's partnerships have been and will continue to be some of the most powerful tools we have to battle violent crime. That is why we are seeking investments in the department's 3 grant-making components: the Office of Justice Programs, the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, and the Office of Violence Against Women. They provide direct support to community and law enforcement partners through more than 200 grant programs. Our budget requests more than $4.3 billion to support the public safety efforts of our state, local, tribal, and territorial law enforcement and community partners. Of that amount, we are requesting $2.5 billion for our COPS hiring program to support law enforcement agencies across the country in their efforts to hire full-time law enforcement professionals. And we are requesting $120.5 million as part of our new Violent Crime Reduction and Prevention Fund to fund 940 detectives at the state and local level. As I have noted before, when the Justice Department was founded in 1870, one of its principal purposes was to protect civil rights. Today, protecting the safety and the civil rights of everyone in this country remains our urgent obligation. Our budget seeks $201.3 million for the Civil Rights Division to continue its essential work, including its efforts to deter and prosecute hate crimes, to ensure constitutional policing, to enforce federal laws prohibiting discrimination in all its forms, and to protect the right of all eligible citizens to vote and to have that vote counted. The right to vote is the cornerstone of our democracy. Protecting that right also requires us to protect the citizens who we rely on to fairly administer voting. Our democracy cannot function if officials, workers, and volunteers who administer our elections have to fear for their lives just for doing their jobs. The Justice Department is aggressively investigating and prosecuting those who threaten election workers with violence, and we will continue to do so. As I said, I am extremely proud of the department's employees who are doing the work necessary to advance the department's mission. Every day, their work brings them face to face with some of our country's greatest challenges. Every day, many of them risk their lives to protect the public. I am grateful to them. I respectfully ask for your support for the President's fiscal year 2025 budget requests so that we can continue our work on behalf of the American people.
Thank you, Attorney General Garland. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions for the witness. I will begin by recognizing myself. You mentioned in your testimony about being here last year at this time. This time last year, too, there were 120,000 people who died because of our inability to staunch the flow of fentanyl, especially. The most recent data from CDC shows that from May 22 to May 23, for the first time in American history, over 112,000 Americans died from a drug overdose, 2,200 of those from my state of Kentucky alone. Fentanyl remains the primary driver of that increase in overdose deaths, and young Americans have been particularly hard hit. For teenagers, 84% of fatal overdoses involved fentanyl, almost all. Last week, Director Wray, the FBI director, was testifying here when he said that, quote, the last 2 years in a row, the FBI seized enough fentanyl to kill 270 million American people. There can be no doubt that a tragically high amount of narcotics are slipping through our southern border, and the border crisis created by this administration is a dream scenario for cartels. They've never had it so good. The department's budget submission has listed combating drug trafficking and preventing overdose deaths as a top priority. With multiple agencies and components within the Department of Justice implementing strategies to counter fentanyl, how are you assuring and ensuring that agencies don't silo their intelligence and that these efforts complement rather than inhibit each other?
It's a very important point, Mr. Chairman. Fentanyl is the deadliest drug threat this country has ever faced, both because it's extraordinarily cheap to make, extraordinarily profitable to sell, and because how often it can be fatal. As the DEA has said in its public affairs campaign, just one pill can kill. So the Justice Department and the government as a whole has an all-government and all-department approach to this question. And you're exactly right, we have to prevent any kind of siloing. So FBI, DEA, the marshals, OCDAF, the criminal division, the civil division, and our grants to local and state government law enforcement are all combined to work together to battle this scourge. It begins with the precursor companies in China. You can't make the fentanyl without the precursors. So we are doing everything we can. We have charged and indicted the precursor companies. The Treasury Department has sanctioned the precursor companies. The precursors then move into Mexico. We have I've personally traveled to Mexico 3 times. The Deputy Attorney General, I believe, has also traveled at least 3 times. Other high government officials have traveled to persuade the Mexican government to put controls on the precursors and to stop the precursors from coming in. In Mexico, we are working with the Mexican Marines and the Mexican Army to destroy the labs and to take down the cartels, and in particular to get assistance in the extradition of the cartel members who we have indicted in the United States. We have indicted dozens of members of the Mexican cartels. We have obtained successful extraditions of people like Ovidio Guzman, who was one of the Chapitos, the son of El Chapo. We've gotten some support in bringing these people into the United States. Then the next thing that happens is exactly as you say, it crosses our southern border. As the Secretary of Homeland Security has testified, most of this comes through the ports of entry, crossing the border. And what's necessary at that point is for more money for the Department of Homeland Security. I hate to be here asking for money for another department, but if we're going to stop fentanyl from coming in, they need the large X-ray machines, the fast X-ray machines that can look at these trucks and these SUVs and these passenger cars as they come across the border. Then FBI picks, and DEA in the United States picks up the traffickers once they come into the United States. And in combined operations, including work from the marshals and the U.S. attorney's offices, investigates using the latest investigative tools and prosecutes. The DEA has, at the very end of the line, a public affairs campaign. We have to cut off the demand as well, and that's why we emphasize that one pill can kill. That's why I went to the DEA headquarters and met with the families, very kind of families that you're talking about. Young people who have died taking a pill they had
General,
no idea was fentanyl.
What percentage of your drug trafficking work, what percent is tied to illegal smuggling from Mexico?
Well, I can't give a number in that regard, but as I said, the vast majority of fentanyl comes into the United States, smuggled in trucks and cars coming across ports of entry. That's what the Department of Homeland Security has identified.
To be even clearer, would your counter-drug efforts be even more successful if we had complete control of our southern border?
If we had the X-ray machines and other investigative devices necessary to detect fentanyl as it was coming across the border, absolutely. If we could cut off that flow, that would vastly decrease. There will be other ways that people will try to get it in through the mail, through shipping, et cetera. But if we could cut off fentanyl crossing the border using these new technologies, that would make an enormous dent in the dangerous poison that is flooding our cities.
Last week, we had FBI Director Wray sitting in the seat you now occupy. He noted that he wished there was more cooperation from Mexico about drug trafficking. From a department-wide counter-drug perspective, what is the level of cooperation we are receiving or not from Mexico?
I would echo what the director said. I wish there were more cooperation. We are getting cooperation. We have had extraditions. They have destroyed some labs. They have reduced precursors coming into the country, but we need much, much more cooperation.
As I understand it, the current Mexican government has severely constrained DOJ's ability to work alongside their Mexican counterparts to disrupt the cartels. What is the department and this administration doing to restore full law enforcement partnerships with Mexican partners?
Yes. So the FBI I think as the director testified, has been successful in setting up some vetting teams. I have personally gone to Mexico to speak with the Attorney General to re-up the degree of cooperation that had previously existed with the DEA. I would say I've not been completely successful in that effort yet, but I am persistent and I will not give up until the cooperation with DEA is as fulsome as possible.
There are people based on that lack of a border control who say that the Mexican government really is complicit with the cartels. Would you say that?
Well, I don't want to comment on that specifically, though. The cartels are enormously profitable. They have more money than some nation states, and there are places in Mexico where it is difficult to deal with the cartels. I will say that when Mexican law enforcement, and particularly the naval forces, the Marines, and the Army have gone to arrest people that we've extradited, this has come at enormous loss to them as well. I called the Secretary of the Navy there to give my condolences for the deaths of Marines in connection with the arrest of Ovidio. They have a very difficult job, as we do.
Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Garland, it didn't escape my notice that you commented on crime statistics a little bit in your opening statement. Is that correct?
Yes.
And we keep track of crime statistics here in the United States, not just federal crimes, but all state and local crimes. We keep track of violent crimes. We keep track of crimes against property. Am I correct in that?
Yes, that's what the FBI's Uniform Crime Reports, now the NIBRS reports.
And you said homicides dropped more last year than any other year in the last 30 years. Is that right?
That's right.
It's not just limited to a drop in homicide, though, is it, Attorney General Garland?
No, the FBI shows a decrease in violent crime across the board as well.
And it's not just limited to a decrease in violent crime. Yesterday, a reputable analytics company came out with a report that reviewed all of the national information on crime. And it's if you separate out violent crime versus property crime, take violent crime. He noted violent crime is down a considerable amount. Violent crime including murder, down, manslaughter, down, rape, down, robbery, down, aggravated assault, down, all of them down a considerable amount. And then even into property crime, with the exception of motor vehicle theft, burglary down, larceny theft down, all of these down a considerable amount. Am I stating that correctly, Attorney General Garland?
You are. Obviously, there's differences in different places in the country, and some have gone up and some have gone down, but those are overall numbers. I also want to say I think I understated the success on homicide. It's actually the largest deduction in 50 years.
It's down more than any other year in the last 50 years.
Right. I think I said 30, but 50 I think is the correct number.
Thank you for the correction, Attorney General Garland, and thank you for the good hard work of solid police work and solid prosecutorial work that done not only by the Department of Justice, but also by the state and local police and prosecutors. That's who deserves the credit for this, isn't it?
They're the ones who deserve the credit. We support them. We help them. We deal with the most difficult crimes. We provide them with technological support. But the people who are actually face-to-face with violent crime in their communities are the state and local police and law enforcement.
Well, you are here today before the Appropriations panel, and we're the ones that fund your efforts. One of the most important areas that I look into are the cops hiring grants, and as I mentioned in my opening statement, the Burn Justice Assistance Grants. I've been very proud to bring grants home in both of those areas to fund local police and also to fund efforts by our local district attorneys. These are the ones that deserve the credit for that huge drop in crime over the last year, aren't they?
I quite agree with that, yes.
And don't let me put words in your mouth, Attorney General. What else who else deserves the credit for this big drop in crime that America has experienced?
Look, we know and because we've had experience over decades now with the right kind of strategies for reducing violent crime. These strategies from the federal point of view require the kind of cooperation, the non-siloing that the chairman was speaking among all of our agencies, are then creating joint task forces with state and local law enforcement who are enormous force multipliers for the department. Our U.S. attorney's offices who reach out to communities, our grant programs to support community violence interrupters who go out into communities and prevent the crime from happening in the first place, who are willing to meet with potentially violent people and talk them down. So the importance of our grants to local communities to enhance good relationships between the police and the communities, because we don't get good policing and effective policing unless the community trusts the police. So it's a combination across the board of federal law enforcement, state and local law enforcement, community engagement.
Well, that's well said. I want to focus on hiring of attorneys to go into prosecution work. Attorney General, what is the Department of Justice doing right now to prioritize creating efficiencies in its hiring and reducing the time to hire so that we have enough attorneys working for the Department of Justice and in prosecution generally?
Well, with respect to law enforcement reduction in time to hire, this is a significant issue with respect to retention, promotion, recruitment in law enforcement. Sometimes both federal law enforcement and state and local law enforcement take so long to hire the person, to go through the whole background and vetting process, that the person already accepts another job before we can finish that process and before state and locals can. So our COPS office has created a playbook for state and local law enforcement to increase and streamline that process. And of course, we are looking internally to do the same thing.
Well, my time has expired, Attorney General, and I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Garcia?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Attorney General Garland, for being here today. I view these annual appropriations hearings as similar to investor briefs, annual investor briefs, right? We get to talk to you about what's going on in your organization, the money you're asking for, the past performance, the vision, the path forward. I don't think most Americans know what the Department of Justice does. I don't think most Americans know what the Attorney General does. So I went on your website and just printed out the mission statement. The mission statement of the Department of Justice is to uphold the rule of law, to keep our country safe, and to protect civil rights. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. You've been in office since 2021. You report directly to the president, and you know your mission. For your investors, the American taxpayers, how would you grade your performance over the last 3 years relative to that mission?
Well, I would grade the work of our.
And I'm talking about you, Attorney General. With all due respect to you and your team, I have all the respect in the world for the agents in the field. They are doing God's work on a daily basis. So this line of questioning is specifically about you as someone who is on the cabinet, reports directly to the president during a period of record high crime rates. Before my colleagues across the aisle get offended, I am not talking about the agents in the field here. I think they're doing God's work. They're doing A+ with the resources that they're given and the policies that they're working under. I'm asking you, how would you grade yourself as the Attorney General of the United States?
Well, you ask about violent crime. I think what the Attorney General does with respect to violent crime is set forth a strategy for fighting violent crime and ensures that it's carried out throughout the department, throughout the country. So what I did almost immediately after I came into office.
I don't mean to cut you off, but we're short on time. I'm just asking for a grade, A through F. How are you doing?
I'm going to give myself an A,
Okay.
With room for improvement.
Okay. Let me explain to you why I would give you an F. We just heard why Mr. Cartwright from Pennsylvania was citing the decline in crime nationwide. Your mission is to uphold the rule of law, and crossing the border is a crime. It is illegal per Penal Code 8 U.S.C. 1325. Crossing international border is a crime. We have 7.5 million people under your tenure who have come across our border. When you say there's a decline in homicides by about 20%, historic high in decline in homicides in 30 years or 50 years, whatever the number is, does that include the 75,000 people who were killed by fentanyl or poisoned by fentanyl by, in many cases, dealers who knew they actually were selling fentanyl and the victims did not? Does that decline in homicides of 20% include the 75,000 fentanyl poisonings?
I'm sure that it does not include the fentanyl poisoning.
Those were American lives lost, though, right? Who were killed by illicit drug dealers for the most part.
That's right.
So why is that not
That's right.
considered a homicide?
Our U.S. Attorney's offices do pursue fentanyl traffickers, and including even the sale of small amounts where we can establish that the trafficker is the one who caused the death.
Do you charge them with homicide when that's the case?
We have there's a narcotics statute that includes a sentencing enhancement for death. We don't prosecute homicides; those are state law.
Okay, so I just want to be clear, when we're putting the cape on and saying there's a 20% reduction in homicides, we are not counting the 75,000 Americans that have been killed by this drug over each year.
I don't believe
the second metric of keeping our country safe. We talk about the deaths to America chants in some of our cities. We heard Ray's testimony last year that we're in one of the most precarious positions our nation has been in our nation's history in the last several decades. We have 10,000 people entering our border a day illegally, 7,000% increase in Chinese immigrants coming across our border illegally, 10,000 people a day coming across the borders. And that's about a 40% increase since your watch began in FY21. 350 people on the known terror watch list. 8 in 10 Americans feel less secure than they did just 3 or 4 years ago, per the Pew Research Center. So your assessment of yourself, I think someone who is in your position, literally reports directly to the president. An attribute of a leader in that position has to be self-aware. They have to have the courage to tell the boss that the boss is screwing up, especially when it's leading to the loss of lives at a level that is unprecedented. And I think you're giving yourself an A, and under these circumstances demonstrates a lack of self-awareness, frankly. I think you've earned an F. I think you need to talk to your boss and tell them that the policies are killing us. It's not the lack of money. I respect the $37 billion investment request here. If I was in charge, I'd give you more. But it's the policies that are broken. And so with that, I'm out of time. I'm happy to discuss more things, but I will wait for the second round to talk about the treatment of law and the application of law to certain demographics, and I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Morelli?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to yield some time to Mr. Cartwright. Yeah, and I'd like to give the Attorney General a chance to respond to what he just heard.
Yeah. So I didn't hear a question in that at all, and I disagree with almost everything that you've said. But I want to be clear that the border responsibility, you're talking to the wrong department here. The Department of Homeland Security is the department responsible for preventing things from coming across the border. The President and the Secretary of Homeland Security have proposed a bipartisan bill to protect the border, to reduce the number of people who come across, and to increase the money spent to prevent fentanyl from coming across the border. So that would be my recommendation in that respect.
And I'll yield back to Mr. Morelli.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll just editorialize. This is the second hearing I've been at, both with the Director of the FBI and the Attorney General. They've been personally attacked. And I want to underscore, there was a bipartisan deal on the table. And as I understand it, the former president persuaded people not to participate in that because didn't want a political win and cared about the politics over the safety of the United States people and the American people. So I'm getting tired at these hearings of listening to these attacks when they can be addressed. Having said that, Mr. Attorney General, thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and certainly thank you for your long service to the country. I want to begin by thanking your staff and you for having provided detailed feedback on a bill which I have reintroduced, the Preventing Deepfakes of Intimate Images Act. This is to prohibit the disclosure of non-consensual deepfake pornography, obviously a growing and alarming problem in the United States. 96% of all deepfakes involve pornography on the internet. And as I work to pass this legislation into law, which I want to hope that I can continue to have lines of communication open to you and to the department, and I wanted to thank you for that. If I can, sir, there's obviously been a lot of public reporting on the release of the special counsel Robert Hur's report back in February of this year. I'm certainly not asking you to comment on the substance of the report, which has been talked about publicly, but as a member of the President's cabinet, someone who has regular contact with the President, would you like to comment on President Biden's fitness generally?
Well, look, I'm start by thanking you for recognizing that I can't comment and won't comment about the special counsel's report at all. But if you're asking me about my own observations as a member of the National Security Council and a member of the President's cabinet, I have complete confidence in the President. I have watched him expertly guide meetings of staff and cabinet members on issues of foreign affairs and military strategy and policy in the incredibly complex world in which we now face, and in which he has been decisive in instructions to the staff and decisive in making the decisions necessary to protect the country. Likewise, with respect to domestic policy discussions, these are intricate, complicated questions that he has guided all of us through in order to reach results that are helpful and important and beneficial to the American people. I could not have more confidence in the President.
Very good. Thank you, sir. I have a number of questions which I may submit in writing, but one thing I did want to get some additional comment you mentioned in your testimony. In addition to my role as an appropriator, I'm proud to serve as the ranking Democrat on the Committee on House Administration, which has jurisdiction over federal election reforms. In July of 21, the Department of Justice launched a task force to address the rise in threats against election workers and election officials. In addition to threats of violence and intimidation, our country's election workers face new and unique pressures driven by the rapid spread of misinformation by extremists. With less than 8 months before the general election, can you provide an update on the activities of the task force and the department's plans to ensure the election workers are protected from threats?
Yes, thank you. As I said in my opening remarks, I think the threats to election workers, particularly the volunteer election workers, but obviously also the secretaries of state and the appointed administrators, and this is a real threat to our democracy to have the people who are running our elections afraid to continue their work. And so we have, I have personally spoken to all of our United States attorneys by video and in addition in person during our conferences. The FBI has agents devoted to this issue, and we have this task force that you're talking about. We have prosecuted more than around 20 cases now, many of which have yielded significant sentences, and we have investigated many, many more and disrupted other kinds of threats. So we are completely seized with the importance of preventing, deterring, disrupting threats against our election workers.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Clyde?
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. Attorney General Garland, as I understand it, the Hatch Act generally prohibits federal employees from lobbying Congress on legislation while on the job. Last week, when the House was considering legislation to reform and reauthorize the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, did you or anyone in your office make phone calls to members of Congress urging them to oppose the Biggs Amendment to require the government to obtain a warrant prior to spying on American citizens through FISA Section 702? A yes or no will suffice.
The Hatch Act and the Constitution permit the members of the President's administration to speak with members who are interested in questions about the effect of legislation, just like you are asking me today about effects.
If we ask, that's one thing, but if we don't ask and you actually reach out, that's a different
That
thing.
does not violate any law of any kind.
Okay, so will you answer my question?
Yes, I discussed the vital United States interest in extending 702 with members.
How many members did you call?
I'm not going to get into my conversations with members.
I'm not asking about the conversations. I'm asking about how many members did you
I'm not
call?
going to get into that question, but I'm telling you,
Okay.
there is nothing
All right.
unlawful. This is the basic.
On March 3rd, 2024, at the Tabernacle Baptist Church in Selma, Alabama, you made comments regarding our country's elections and election security laws passed by various states. Specifically, you claimed that democracy was under attack by, and I quote, discriminatory, burdensome, and unnecessary restrictions on access to the ballot. Attorney General, do you believe requiring an ID to vote in a federal election is discriminatory? Yes or no?
I spoke at the
just yes or no.
iconic church from which the March for Voting Rights began.
Just a yes or no will be fine.
The answer is the Supreme Court's decision says that undue burdens on voting rights caused by voter IDs can be unconstitutional, but that
What?
the burdens, that's right, that's what the Supreme
Voter ID can be unconstitutional.
It can be, depending on the burdens and the discriminatory way in which they are taken. This is
Okay, so do you think it's important to positively identify every voter to ensure that they are a legal voter? I think, as you called it, a legitimate voter.
No, you have to be a United States citizen. You have to meet the qualifications for to be a voter. It's important that only those people vote.
So how do you prove that? I mean, how do you prove what a person is if you don't require ID? I mean, you require ID to get on an airplane. They're not going to let you on an airplane.
I
Well,
don't know what
unless
your
you're illegal, I
experience has
guess.
been, but I have voted every year my entire life, and I've never been asked to show an identification.
I have always been asked to show
Well,
identification.
then we have, but
Wow.
somehow the democracy
So,
has gone on without.
Attorney General Garland, do you believe that illegal aliens residing in the United States should be allowed to vote in federal elections? Yes or no?
No.
All right, great. We agree on something. Other than U.S. citizens, are there any other legitimate voters?
You have to be a U.S. citizen to vote in a federal
You must be a
election.
U.S. citizen. Okay, great. All right. I ask unanimous consent to add this to the record, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir. This is a poster found in the city, outside the city of Matamoros. It was posted around the migrant camps, and it is a poster from HIAS, the Immigrant Aid Society. And this particular poster says, the Resource Center is a 6-unit complex that is home of HIAS. And at the very bottom, it says, reminder to vote for President Biden when you are in the United States. We need another year of your mandate to stay open. That's what this poster says. Reminds illegal immigrants to vote for President Biden. So, is the Department of Justice concerned about illegal aliens voting in federal elections?
The Department of Justice is concerned about any illegalities with respect to voting. I've never seen that poster. I've never heard of that poster. That's the first time I've ever heard anybody even mention that poster.
Well, now you have. So, if any non-citizens vote in federal elections, are you going to prosecute them at the federal level?
Anybody violates the voting laws, and if there are federal voting laws, then and we will investigate and prosecute as appropriate.
All right, that's good to hear. I appreciate that. With the additional money you asked for the Civil Rights Division, I hope that you prosecute illegal voting. Now, last year you promised to provide the prosecution of crime statistics for the city of Washington, D.C. for the last 5 years. It was a question that I asked you. I have not yet received them. So I'm asking you again today, do you commit to provide these statistics, the prosecution of crime statistics for the city of Washington, D.C.? Will you provide these in the next 30 days?
I'll ask my staff to get in touch with yours. I don't know what the problem is with respect to providing those. It doesn't seem like there should be a problem.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate your commitment to provide them, Attorney General. And my time's expired, and I yield back.
Attorney General, you have the power to free Julian Assange.
Committee will be in order.
Attorney General. Free Julian Assange. Freedom of the press is so important. Free Julian Assange.
Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange.
The chair reminds our guests that disruptive demonstrations from the audience are a violation of House rules. Any additional disruptions will require law enforcement to remove protesters from the room and restore order. Mr. Tron.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Cartwright, and thank you, Attorney General Garland, for appearing here today, and thank you for your patience as you deal with this committee. I'm a co-chair of the Bipartisan Second Chance Task Force, and we're concerned about staffing shortages at the BOP. The BOP's funded at 93%, but we're only staffed at 86%. What's happening is education, wraparound services for mental health, et cetera, which can improve our outcomes, job training, get left behind. So we're all in agreement on that. We'd like to figure out how to implement the Bipartisan First Step Act successfully. And to do that, we've got to have the staffing. Could you talk a minute about what this does to lead to lousy outcomes where we can't cut our prison budget because we don't give folks a second chance to win and succeed?
Thanks for the question. I think the First Step Act was extremely important. By focusing on education of inmates, it helps reduce recidivism after people leave. And of course, if we can reduce recidivism after reentry, we can drive down the violent crime rate and prevent it from going up. The Bureau of Prisons makes every effort to ensure that the staffing shortages that you're referring to don't impact the First Step Back programming as well as the medication-assisted treatment programming. But to be frank, if you're asking me what we need most in order to protect the ability to have full staffing at the Bureau of Prisons, we need the money for hiring and retention incentives. Being a correctional officer or being a first step administrator, these are dangerous jobs in facilities that are not that have not been kept up over decades, and where there are adjoining facilities, sometimes state and local facilities, that pay more money. So I'd say if you're asking me for the one thing that will give us a better chance here for the First Step Act and for the Second Chance Act, it would be to give us the money that we're requesting, which is $205.4 million for hiring and retention incentives.
So quite simply, the dollars that you give you, the proper amount of money, will result in saving millions, tens of millions more down the line by cutting recidivism.
I do think that the money we have to provide more incentives for people to stay on the job in the Bureau of Prisons means that the chances of reducing recidivism will increase.
That sounds like a smart investment to me. Second quick question. 75% of BOP inmates do not have a photo ID when they leave prison. They can't secure housing, apply for jobs, open a bank account, federal benefit programs, etc. The Bureau is addressing this by providing some IDs to U.S. citizens now. We have a bipartisan bill, the BOP Release Card Act, that supports this effort at the BOP by ensuring new IDs fulfill all the requirements and directs BOP to work with the states to have a one-on-one exchange so we can work right with the states to move these folks into getting their new ID card and then successfully be able to exchange that for state ID cards. So we would appreciate your help in moving this bill forward. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, we would be happy to give technical assistance, and I think our staffs may have already consulted on this, but of course we'd be happy to give technical assistance. The BOP has implemented its own release ID program in October of 2023, and they're on track for full implementation by this spring.
Excellent, thank you. The DEA has extended current telemedicine flexibilities for prescribing controlled medications through December 31, 24, but there's not a revised proposed rule, and many patients are at risk of losing access to prescriptions needed for mental health and substance use disorder. Last year, my colleagues and I expressed concerns about the proposed DEA rule that would have limited patient access to buprenorphine and encourage an evidence-based approach to make permanent the use of audio-only or audio-visual telehealth technology for buprenorphine prescribing. This is crucial to reach these patient populations, including unhoused, rural, tribal. So as a follow-up to that letter, we introduced the TREATS Act, which allows medication for opioid use disorder to be prescribed via telemedicine. What's DOJ's position on the continued use of telehealth flexibilities to ensure access to these medically necessary substance use disorder treatment, and how is this supported in your budget request?
So as you noted, the DEA and HHS have extended the current telemedicine flexibilities until December 31st of this year. DEA has issued a proposed rule which would allow authorized providers to prescribe medicines for opioid use disorder via telemedicine. They are working to promulgate a final rule by the fall of this year.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Just quickly, restrictive housing, otherwise known as solitary confinement, outdated, inhumane practice, often used way too far too often. We believe the BOP has been dragging its feet to reform this area of restrictive housing. In the past 10 years, DOJ has conducted studies and task force to improve restrictive housing, yet we fail to make any progress. What steps can DOJ and BOP take together so we can make this more effective and improve restrictive housing policies?
Well, the new BOP director is very much committed to what you're talking about. BOP recently published a proposed rule on discipline designed to reduce the use of restrictive housing for disciplinary segregation. BOP is trying to hire more psychologists and provide de-escalation training, which would help reduce the need for restrictive housing.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I yield back.
General Garland, if you would please move the microphone closer to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
To you. We're having a little
I don't know
trouble
if I can
hearing.
move I can't move the microphone.
Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General, for being here. I listened with interest to your opening statement, and I have to say I'm concerned that your actions are speaking louder than your words, especially when you say there's not one set of laws for Democrats and another for Republicans. My constituents and many Americans are watching your actions, which are speaking louder than your words, when it comes to, there really is a crisis of confidence in this country in your department being created by the dual treatment of American citizens depending on their viewpoints or their political positions or their political offices, whether, as your department is currently prosecuting a former president for handling classified documents, your office, and I'm assuming you personally, declined to take action against President Biden for his willful mishandling of classified documents. I appreciate you making the report of Special Counsel Robert Hur public, as was done historically with every other special counsel. Did you review the report prior to its release?
Before I released it, yes, I read it before
Okay.
I released it, yes.
Did you approve of the recommendation? Obviously, you approved of the recommendations because you have it within your power to prosecute, correct?
I'm not going to comment or editorialize on the special counsel's report. I promised I would release it. I did release it. The report speaks for itself. The special counsel sat for something like 5 hours worth of testimony on the subject, and any question about results he reached could have been asked.
So you won't say whether you concur with the conclusions?
I will say, as I said at the time it was released, that I was not going to editorialize or comment on the report. I think that's inappropriate for an attorney general.
So you won't agree that Biden would have come across to a jury as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory?
I've said before, and I'll say again, with respect to the report, that it's improper for the Attorney General to editorialize.
You've talked about
I take that separately from the question you're asking, and if you're asking me about my own observations about the president.
No, you've testified to that fact, and I
Yes,
heard
I
you
have
the first
complete
time.
confidence in the president.
Have you ever seen evidence of impairment in your meetings with the president?
I'm sorry. I testified, and I'll repeat again what I just said.
Well, that's
I've
different than
seen-
my question.
Well, I have seen the president effectively guide the members of the department, of his cabinet and his military through.
But you won't say you've ever seen any impairment on his part?
The president has no impairment. The president.
You've never seen any?
I don't know how many ways I can say this.
Okay.
I have complete confidence in the president, and I reject your characterization.
Okay. Let's talk about the audio recordings of Special Counsel Hur's interviews with President Biden's ghostwriter, Mark Swaniker. You're in possession of those, correct?
Justice Department is possession of them.
Has the White House been permitted access to those recordings?
I don't know what Mr. Hur provided, but I expect that the answer is yes.
So they have access. Let me let you know, well, maybe you're aware, how many times the Judiciary Committee has asked for those documents, asked for those recordings?
I know that the Judiciary Committee has asked. We have sent a letter explaining our position with respect to the recordings.
Three times.
We have provided transcripts of the recordings. Mr. Hur has testified about his observations during his interviews. These are interviews of a witness. It is a longstanding practice of the Justice Department to keep these kinds of documents confidential in order to not chill future investigations.
Confidential, but you provided copies to the White House.
They're this is the witness, the witness's own.
Do you normally provide
interviews.
witnesses in investigations access to their recordings of their interviews?
Sometimes we do and sometimes we don't, but here there are, as you well know, there are privileges to be with respect to national security and other information that were addressed in those recordings and in the interviews. The transcripts themselves had to be cleared through an interagency process. You know that because we said that in the letter to the committee.
Okay, so in my 20 seconds, I want to ask about something you answered to Congressman Clyde. You said following the court's rulings that IDs to vote can be an undue burden. Do you know of an example, or is there any case in which you would consider a photo ID to not be an undue burden? Say if it's a free ID, given to everybody.
You have a very good example. There was the case in which the Supreme Court noted that there was free IDs completely available to everyone without discrimination. In those circumstances, the court upheld the law, yes.
And you
Well, I follow the law. And
agree with that
And
decision?
whether I agree or not, it's the law, and the rule of law requires us to follow it, and that's not what I'm talking about here.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
The subcommittee will stand in recess, subject to the call of the chair.
Thank you.